Good afternoon, everybody. The Global Compact for Migration will be signed in 3 days. You can sign the petition here. You can sign it at the top. The link is in the description, or you can scroll down to the bottom and see how many signatures we've got. Maxime Bernier is tweeting, and this was a tweet from yesterday, but he said, quote, "My totally mainstream position on immigration and multiculturalism has been described as controversial and even extreme by some. Trudeau government is increasing immigration levels by 40% from 250K to 350K, a move supported by only 6% of Canadians. Who are the extremists?" And he's responding to a National Post article that says, quote, "Record opposition among Canadians to taking in more immigrants, but pollster says it's too soon to call it a trend." So it is, it's not a trend as far, I can't officially call it a trend, but I've been seeing that same headline, not a trend yet, everybody, for a while. The last 6 months and even further, I think probably January, people were talking about how immigration levels were getting out of control because this was not the height, clearly, because we're at the height of it now, but the height of the illegal border crossers. And they were saying, oh yeah, it's the loophole in the Safe Third Country Act. In fact, this is their whole plan. Like illegal migrants walking across the border, that's their plan. They were the whole time, this has been a soft open for the Global Compact on Migration. They're behaving as if that treaty was enacted already, and that's terrible. So, as I reported the other day, Andrew Scheer has come out against the Global Compact, and that sent everybody in Canada's media heads spinning. And Brian Lilley is reporting on that for the Toronto Sun, and this is from December 6th. Quote, "UN Global Compact for Migration is bad for Canada's sovereignty," says Scheer. As Scheer says, and all it took to get Canada's media talking heads to notice the United Nations Global Compact for Migration was Andrew Scheer to say something about it. Then they started fact-checking him. A search of CBC's website showed no coverage from a Canadian point of view about the Compact until this week. They had some stories about Germany and Austria debating the issue, but nothing about Canada. Then, Scheer said he was against the Global Compact and a Conservative government would not sign on. Suddenly, the Canadian media outlets were interested in this international agreement and wanted to fact-check Scheer. It's an odd habit of the media that cover Parliament Hill. They seem to put more effort into fact-checking the leader of the opposition than the Prime Minister. Soon, a former Harper-era cabinet minister was found to dispute Scheer, and CBC and the rest of the Laurentian elites were off. Campbell Clark at the Globe and Mail is claiming that opposition to this treaty is all about anti-immigrant right-wingers fanning flames. I'm going to skip down a bit. So what did Scheer say that got the media so incensed that they finally paid attention to this agreement Canada will sign on to next week? Quote, "What we're saying today is that by signing on this compact, that our sovereignty to make those decisions ourselves as a country will be eroded," Scheer said. "Not true," said the media. Quote, "Scheer's statement is factually incorrect. This compact is a political declaration, not a legally binding treaty. It has no impact on our sovereignty," Alexander tweeted. Scheer said it would be eroded. He didn't say it would end. All treaties, all international agreements erode sovereignty to a degree, and some are more welcome than others. Does Scheer have a point? Absolutely. One, he explains in his news conference. Quote, "There are many examples where agreements and pacts and accords signed onto are used as justifications for rulings in our own courts," Scheer said. On this, he is absolutely correct. And don't think a judge here in Canada won't look to the text of the agreement and say Canada must do more to implement it. The compact calls several times for signatories to change their laws, such as when it says countries should, quote, "determine the legislative and policy measures for the implementation of the Global Compact." This agreement doesn't, as some claim, give everyone in the world the right to immigrate to Canada, but it does spend a lot of time talking about rights. Quote, "Refugees and migrants are entitled to the same universal human rights and fundamental freedoms which must be respected, protected, and fulfilled at all times," the document reads. How will an activist judge interpret that clause in the future? Or what about the calls for for governments to re-educate the media? Quote, "Promote independent, objective, and quality reporting of media outlets, including internet-based information, including by sensitizing and educating media professionals on migration-related issues and terminology," the agreement says. And I thought, well, I got to see if it's there. Is it there? And it's there. Paragraph 33, and it's there. Hold on a second, I'll find it. Objective 17, eliminate all forms of discrimination and promote evidence-based public discourse to shape perceptions of migration. Doesn't that sound like straight out of Demolition Man? John Spartan. So paragraph 33, subsection C, it says, we want to eliminate all forms of discrimination. To realize this commitment, we will draw from the following actions. And that is promote independent, objective, and quality reporting of media outlets, including internet-based information, by sensitizing and educating the media professionals on migration-related issues and terminology. Investing in ethical reporting standards and advertising, and stopping allocation of public funding or material support to media outlets that systemically promote intolerance, xenophobia, racism, and other forms of discrimination towards migrants in full respect for the freedom of the media. So you could totally be free, but if you say anything about migrants, we will shut down all of your monetization. All of it, right? Weird. Not weird, absolutely draconian, authoritarian, and against free speech. This is a charter. Like, why do we not have a charter level court battle or some other something to stop this from being signed? It's incredible. So the media is reporting and doing everything they can to sensitize, from Strombo to, whoever else on the CBC who has suddenly become a political expert and read the whole thing, and it's totally nothing to worry about. Right, Strombo? You totally know what you're talking about. Hard eye roll. Okay, so moving on, the NDP leader, if you had any concern or question if he was a patriot or a globalist, I'll tell you, he's a globalist. And here's the CPAC tweeting out, quote, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh on conservative concerns regarding UN Global Compact on migration. Quote, this pact is an acknowledgement of global responsibility to address immigration. Rising concerns around sovereignty or undermining of sovereignty isn't made out in the evidence at all. And I'll let you hear him say it directly.
He's talking about attacks on our sovereignty when that's nothing at all contained in this pact. This pact is an acknowledgement of a global responsibility to address immigration, and putting in concerns or raising concerns around sovereignty or undermining of sovereignty is not made out in the evidence at all. It has nothing to do with what's being discussed. It's a pact to acknowledge that immigration is a global phenomenon. With the increase in wars, with the increase in economic disparity, with climate change, there will be more immigration, and we need a global approach to this growing trend. And the Conservative response is baseless, and it's raising fears. It's an InfoWars style approach without actually basing on the evidence.
So it's interesting to watch the leader of the NDP conflate migration with immigration. They're not the same thing, and they're not even the same thing in the Global Compact. It's really, really strange. The word immigration is mentioned 7 times in the Global Compact, and most of the time it's talking about immigration detention. So like this example is ensure all governmental authorities and private actors duly charged with administering immigration detention do so in a way consistent with human rights and are trained on non-discrimination and the prevention of arbitrary arrest and detention in the context of international migration, and are held accountable for violations of abuse or abuses of human rights. So they're talking a lot about immigration detention, but it's not the way you'd think. Like here's another one. This is Objective 13, use immigration detention only as a measure of last resort and work towards alternatives. And number C is review and revise relevant legislation, policies, and practices related to immigration detention to ensure that migrants are not detained arbitrarily, that decisions to detain are based on law and are proportionate and have a legitimate purpose, and are taken on an individual basis in full compliance with due process and procedural safeguards, and that immigration detention is not promoted as a deterrent or used as a form of cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment to migrants in accordance with international human rights law. You see, they're making the distinction within the document that the leader of the NDP was just talking about, and he said this pact acknowledges rising responsibility to address immigration, while this compact talks specifically of migration. They are different. So that's interesting that the leader of the NDP either didn't know that or didn't find that important enough to note in his press conference there. That's strange. Did you read it, Jagmeet, or did you just skim it? Did you look at the top word? Even the top word says Global Compact on Migration. It has very little to do with immigration. This is Objective 14, enhance consular protection, assistance, and cooperation through the migration cycle. Involve relevant consular and immigration personnel in existing global and regional fora on migration in order to exchange information and best practices about issues of mutual concern that pertain to citizens abroad and contribute to comprehensive and evidence-based migration policy development. Like, again, I'm just trying to underline that migration and immigration are different. Migration happens when a war kicks off through no fault of whatever the local population, and they have to leave, right? Or a flood and their homes are gone, or something to that effect, right? Immigration is you've got a job in the United States and you've called some people and you've arranged an apartment and you hope that it's not a Kijiji disaster, like you've paid first and last, and you get there and you hope the key works, right? Not from experience. I just read it online one day. But there's a big difference. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't be helped if a war breaks out. That's not what I'm saying. Far from it. But I am saying mass migration, bringing mass migrants to the shores of Canada, or saying that anybody who touches Canadian soil automatically gets human rights and needs to be put up in a hotel at taxpayer cost, are really different things. And it's a lot cheaper to help people. You can help 10 times the number of people for the cost of one migrant coming to a Western country. You could help 10 in their home region by supplying local populations that are stable with money instead of bringing people to our country, right? And if you've looked at the migrants and gumballs, or immigration and gumballs, you can never bring enough people to help the actual country, because as you bring people, you're emptying out the movers and the shakers who would build the country if they didn't have an option, if they had to stay. And not to say they have to stay if there's a war or something to that effect. That's not what I'm talking about. Syria is a good example. If people can stay in Canada instead of going back to build their country, that doesn't help Syria, and that doesn't help Canada either. It's a drain on our economy. It's not the boon that they're trying to sell it as. It's a drain. And politicians who should know better, who are leaders of the party, shouldn't be getting on national television and calling leaders of other parties InfoWars style conspiracy theorists, etc., because that doesn't help the conversation. That just tries to shut it down. You're not even engaging with the fact that migrants are different than immigrants. You're conflating the two, sir. So have a read, Jagmeet. You're not doing your job. Finally, I saw this tweet and it made me laugh. And there's a source for the first one and not a source for the second one. So this was Jason Kenney, the leader of the United Conservatives in Alberta, I believe. And he says, it says Kenney roast Trudeau. Quote, "This guy was my critic in opposition for 2.5 years. I worked very closely with him, and I don't think he understands what he says. What I learned working closely with Mr. Trudeau is that he kind of memorizes various lines and cliches, and he just sort of strings them together incoherently. And people, it's like the emperor's clothes. Everybody around him nods, and they pretend they know what he's saying. It's embarrassing. It's utterly embarrassing." And here's another one. This is Mr. Doug's Place tweeted about this, and he says, I'm still trying to figure this one out. Quote, "It is clear that the way forward for Canada will be in a solution that resembles Canada, that has shared values and shared desires for outcomes and different approaches to achieve those outcomes right across this great country." So when I talk about word salad and Justin Trudeau wondering if he wants hot dogs or, spaghetti noodles with a little bit of cheese on them for lunch, I'm saying that he doesn't get it. And I think that it's interesting. I didn't see any of this. Like, this was tweeted out on the 5th, or this was aired on the 5th. I didn't know any of this before I was talking about that. But I'm glad that other people see that this guy is an empty suit, right? He's vacant kind of behind the eyes. He's doing what he's told. And what he's told is globalist. He is a globalist through and through. And so is this guy. And Andrew Scheer, the jury's still out, man. The jury's still out. You waited till 5 days left to come out about the Global Compact on migration? I don't know. Maxime Bernier was on it on October 24th. We've got one patriot in this race, guys. So check out the People's Party of Canada. Thanks for watching, and have a wonderful afternoon.